The blood-soaked divorce papers arrived in Willits, California on a blistering August afternoon in 1875, and Martha Lawson knew her life in this frontier town was about to become unbearable. She stood in the general store, her hands trembling as she clutched the envelope the stage driver had just delivered, aware of every whisper, every sideways glance from the other women pretending to examine bolts of fabric. The paper felt like it was burning her fingers, though she had not yet opened it. She already knew what was inside. Thomas had finally done it. After 3 years of separation, after abandoning her to return east with another woman, he had secured the divorce she had begged him for. But in this small California mountain town, where propriety mattered more than truth, the scarlet letter of divorce would mark her far worse than his abandonment ever had. "Is that what I think it is?" Mrs. Henderson's shrill voice cut through the humid air of the store. "Are those divorce papers?" Martha's throat tightened. She wanted to run, to disappear into the mountains that surrounded this isolated lumber town, but her feet seemed rooted to the worn wooden floorboards. "Yes," she said quietly, lifting her chin with what little dignity she could muster. "My husband has divorced me." The gasps that followed were theatrical and cruel. Mrs. Henderson clutched her chest as if Martha had announced she was carrying the plague. "Well, I never. A divorced woman, right here in Willits." "Thomas left me 3 years ago," Martha said, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "He abandoned me without a word, took our savings, and ran off with a woman from Sacramento. I have done nothing wrong except survive." "A woman must have done something to drive her husband away," Mrs. Patterson chimed in from behind a display of canned goods. "No decent man abandons a good wife." The injustice of it all nearly choked Martha. For 3 years, she had worked her fingers to the bone, taking in laundry and mending, barely scraping together enough to pay rent on the tiny room above the seamstress shop. She had maintained her dignity, attended church every Sunday, and never spoke ill of Thomas despite his betrayal. And now that the legal document finally freed her from a marriage that had been dead for years, these women looked at her as if she were something filthy they had scraped off their boots. "Excuse me," Martha whispered, pushing past Mrs. Henderson and fleeing the store. The afternoon sun hit her like a physical blow as she stumbled onto the dirt street. Willits stretched before her in all its rough frontier glory, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to existence in the shadow of towering redwoods and mountains. Lumber was king here, and the men who worked the mills and logging camps outnumbered women 5 to 1. It should have been a place where a woman alone could find opportunity, but Martha knew the truth. The very men who might have offered her honest work would now view her as something else entirely. A divorced woman, available, ruined. She made it to her small room before the tears came, hot and bitter. The space was barely large enough for her narrow bed and a small table, but it was hers. She had worked for every penny that kept a roof over her head. She sank onto the bed, the divorce papers crumpling in her fist. A knock at her door startled her an hour later. She wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself before answering. It was Mrs. Donnelly, the seamstress who owned the building. "Martha, dear," the older woman said, her kind face creased with worry. "I have just heard the news spreading through town. I want you to know that I do not hold with such nonsense. You are a good woman and you work hard." Hope fluttered in Martha's chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Donnelly. That means more than you know." But the older woman's expression was pained. "However, I must think of my business. Already, Mrs. Henderson has made it clear that she and her friends will take their custom elsewhere if I continue to house a divorced woman. I am sorry, Martha. Truly, I am. But I cannot afford to lose their business. I must ask you to find other lodgings by the end of the month." The hope died as quickly as it had sparked to life. Martha nodded numbly. "I understand." When Mrs. Donnelly left, Martha sat in the gathering dusk and tried to think. Where could she go? She had no family, no savings beyond a few dollars hidden in a tin under her bed. The other boarding houses in town would refuse her once word spread, and word would spread. By tomorrow, every person in Willits would know that Martha Lawson was a divorced woman. The next 3 weeks confirmed her worst fears. The women who had hired her for laundry and mending suddenly had no work to offer. At church, people shifted away from her pew as if divorce were contagious. Even Reverend Walsh, who had counseled her with kindness when Thomas first left, now regarded her with barely concealed disapproval. She overheard him telling a parishioner that divorce was an abomination, that a woman should cleave to her husband no matter what trials God sent her way. By the end of September, Martha had exhausted every option in Willits. She had knocked on every door, inquired at every business. No one would hire her. No one would rent to her. She had $3 to her name and nowhere to go. On her last night in the little room above the seamstress shop, she packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag and tried to formulate a plan. She could try to make it to Sacramento, perhaps find work in a larger city where her reputation would not precede her. But the stage fare was more than she could afford, and the journey on foot would be dangerous for a woman alone. She was sitting on the bed, paralyzed by indecision, when she heard shouting in the street below. Curious despite her misery, she went to the window and looked out. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, their voices raised in the aggressive way of men who had been drinking. Among them, she recognized several loggers who worked in the camps up in the mountains. "Someone needs to teach that uppity woman a lesson," one of them slurred. "Thinks she is too good for honest work now that she is available." Martha's blood ran cold when she realized they were talking about her. She stepped back from the window, her heart racing. She had rejected the advances of several men in recent weeks, men who seemed to think a divorced woman would be grateful for any attention, no matter how crude. Apparently, some of them had taken offense. She extinguished her lamp and sat in the darkness, listening to the voices below gradually fade as the men dispersed. She did not sleep that night. When dawn finally broke, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Martha made a decision. She could not stay in Willits another day. She would walk out of town and take her chances in the wilderness. At least the mountains would not judge her. She left before the town fully woke, slipping out the back entrance with her carpet bag and the $3 sewn into the lining of her dress. She wore her sturdiest boots and her warmest shawl, though the September morning was mild. She knew the mountain weather could turn cold without warning. The road north out of Willits was little more than a logging trail, rutted by wagon wheels and bordered by towering redwoods. Martha walked steadily, putting distance between herself and the town that had rejected her. She had no clear destination in mind, only the desperate hope that she might find a homestead or small settlement where her past was unknown. By midday, the trail had grown steeper and more rugged. Martha's feet ached, and her stomach growled with hunger. She had brought a small amount of bread and cheese, but she rationed it carefully, not knowing when she would next have access to food. The forest around her was beautiful but intimidating, the massive trees blocking out much of the sunlight and casting everything in green shadow. She had been walking for perhaps 6 hours when she heard the sound of rushing water. Following the noise, she found a small creek tumbling over mossy rocks. She knelt to drink and refill her canteen, grateful for the cold, clean water. As she stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, she heard a different sound. a low, rumbling growl that made every hair on her body stand on end. Martha turned slowly and found herself staring at a massive black bear not 20 yards away. The animal stood on its hind legs, easily 7 feet tall, its small eyes fixed on her. She froze, remembering advice she had heard about bears. Do not run, do not scream, make yourself look big. But her body refused to cooperate with her mind. Her legs trembled and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The bear dropped to all fours and took a step toward her, and Martha knew she was about to die. The shot rang out like a thunderclap, echoing through the forest. The bear roared, startled by the sudden noise, and crashed back into the undergrowth, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Martha stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "You all right, miss?" The voice was deep and rough, like gravel in a riverbed. Martha spun around and found herself facing a man who looked as if he had been carved from the mountains themselves. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms were thick with muscle, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his worn flannel shirt. He had long, dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and a beard that covered the lower half of his face. In his large hands, he held a rifle, still pointed at the ground where the bear had been. "I asked if you are all right," he repeated, his hazel eyes studying her with concern. Martha found her voice. "Yes, I think so. You saved my life." He lowered the rifle completely and took a step closer. His movements were careful, measured, as if he were approaching a skittish animal. "That old bear would not have hurt you. Just curious, most likely, but I figured the shot would scare him off and save us both some trouble." "Thank you," Martha managed. "I am grateful for your intervention regardless." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her dusty traveling dress, her worn carpetbag, her pale, frightened face. "You are a long way from anywhere, miss. Are you lost?" Martha considered lying, but something about this man's steady gaze made deception seem pointless. "No, not lost. I am leaving Willits, on foot, alone." His eyebrows rose. "That is not safe. These mountains are full of dangers beyond curious bears." "I have nowhere else to go," she said quietly, "and no means to get there even if I did." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "My name is Logan Sawyer. I have a cabin about 3 miles from here, up in the high country. I do some hunting and trapping, and I supply game to the lumber camps. It is not much, but it is safe and dry. You are welcome to rest there, at least until you figure out what you plan to do." Martha knew she should refuse. Going off alone with a strange man was dangerous, possibly more dangerous than facing another bear. But as she looked at Logan Sawyer's weathered face, she saw no trace of the predatory interest that had been in the eyes of the men back in Willits. He looked at her with simple concern, as if he had found an injured animal and wanted to help it. "I am Martha Lawson," she said, "and I would be grateful for a place to rest if you are certain it is no trouble." "No trouble," he said simply. He reached for her carpetbag. "Let me carry that for you. The trail gets rougher from here." They walked in silence through the forest, Logan leading the way with the confidence of a man who knew every tree and stone. Martha struggled to keep up with his long strides, though he seemed to be making an effort to go slowly for her benefit. The trail climbed steadily, winding through groves of massive redwoods and open meadows dotted with wildflowers. After nearly 2 hours of walking, they emerged into a small clearing. Logan's cabin sat at the far edge, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. It was larger than Martha had expected, well built and well maintained. A lean-to beside the cabin sheltered a stack of firewood, and a small garden patch showed the remnants of a summer vegetable crop. "Home," Logan said simply. He led her to the cabin and opened the door, gesturing for her to enter first. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. The single large room was divided into areas by function. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a table and 2 chairs nearby. A bed with a patchwork quilt occupied one corner. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies, tools, and books. Books. Martha felt a small surge of surprise. She had not expected a mountain man to be a reader. "You can take the bed," Logan said, setting her carpetbag on the floor. "I will sleep outside. There is a nice spot under the lean-to." "I cannot take your bed," Martha protested. "You have already done so much." He shook his head. "I will not have you sleeping on the ground, Miss Lawson. The bed is yours for as long as you need it." There was a finality in his tone that suggested argument would be pointless. Martha nodded, suddenly overwhelmed with exhaustion. The fear, the long walk, the emotional toll of the past weeks, it all crashed over her at once. "Thank you," she whispered, and was mortified when tears began sliding down her cheeks. Logan looked uncomfortable, the way most men did when faced with a crying woman. But instead of fleeing, he moved to the shelves and began preparing food. "You need to eat something and rest. We can talk later about what brings you out to these mountains alone." He prepared a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread, moving around the small space with efficient grace. When he set a plate in front of her, Martha realized she was ravenous. She ate quickly, barely tasting the food, just grateful to have something in her stomach. When she finished, Logan heated water for washing and then excused himself, leaving her alone in the cabin. Martha cleaned her face and hands, changed into her nightdress, and collapsed onto the bed. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sound of Logan moving around outside, settling himself for the night. She woke to morning light streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. The bear, Logan Sawyer, the cabin in the mountains. She rose and dressed quickly, her body stiff and sore from the long walk. When she stepped outside, she found Logan crouched by a small campfire, cooking what looked like fresh trout. "Morning," he said without looking up. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Martha admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." He glanced at her then, his hazel eyes searching her face. "Are you ready to tell me why a woman like you was wandering alone in the wilderness?" Martha sat on a log near the fire, accepting the plate of fish and fried potatoes he offered. "I am divorced," she said bluntly. "My husband left me 3 years ago, but the papers only arrived last month. The town of Willits decided that made me unfit for polite society. No one would employ me or house me. I had nowhere else to go." Logan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "That is a hard thing," he said finally. "But running into the mountains without supplies or a plan is a good way to end up dead." "I know," Martha said. "I just could not stay there anymore. The way people looked at me, the things they said, I felt like I was suffocating." He nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. It is part of why I live up here instead of in town. People can be cruel, especially when they think they have the right to judge. What brought you to the mountains?" Martha asked, curious about this man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. Logan poked at the fire with a stick, his expression distant. "I came out west after the war. I fought for the Union, saw things no man should see. When it ended, I could not go back to Ohio, could not pretend to be the person I had been before. So I kept moving until I found these mountains. Been here about 8 years now." "Do you ever get lonely?" The question slipped out before Martha could stop it. He looked at her then, something flickering in his eyes. "Sometimes, but lonely is better than being surrounded by people who do not understand you. At least, that is what I tell myself. They fell into silence, finishing their breakfast. Martha found herself studying Logan when she thought he was not looking. He was intimidating in his size and obvious strength, but there was a gentleness in the way he moved, a carefulness that suggested he was aware of his power and chose to restrain it. She had never met a man quite like him. "What are your plans, Miss Lawson?" Logan asked eventually. "You cannot stay here indefinitely, much as I would be happy to help you." The question hit her like a stone to the chest. She had been trying not to think about it. "I do not know," she admitted. "I thought perhaps I could make it to another town, somewhere larger where my past would not matter. But I have no money for stage fare and no skills beyond laundry and mending." Logan was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "There is a settlement about 20 miles north of here. Little place called Laytonville. It is bigger than Willits with more opportunities. If you wanted to try your luck there, I could guide you when you are ready." "You would do that?" Martha felt tears prick at her eyes again. This man owed her nothing, yet he kept offering help without asking for anything in return. "I would," he said simply, "but not today. You need to rest and recover your strength. Maybe in a week or so if the weather holds. A week." Martha knew she should feel anxious about imposing on his hospitality for so long, but instead she felt only relief. A week in this peaceful clearing, away from judgment and scorn, sounded like heaven. The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Logan would leave early in the morning to check his trap lines or hunt, and Martha would tidy the cabin and prepare simple meals from his supplies. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk, their conversations ranging from books they had read to memories of their childhoods to observations about the natural world around them. Martha learned that Logan was 32, 6 years older than she was. He had grown up on a farm in Ohio, the youngest of 4 brothers. He had taught himself to read as a boy, borrowing books from the local minister, and had continued to educate himself throughout his life. He ordered books from San Francisco whenever he went down to the larger towns, building a collection that was impressive for a man living alone in the mountains. "I always wanted to be a teacher," he admitted one night as they sat watching the stars emerge above the clearing. "Before the war, I thought I might save up enough to go to college, get my certificate. But the war changed everything. I changed everything." "You would have made a good teacher," Martha said. "You are patient and thoughtful. Those are rare qualities." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "What about you, Miss Lawson? What did you want before life took you in a different direction?" Martha pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, remembering the girl she had been before Thomas. "I wanted to open a bakery. My mother was an excellent baker, and she taught me everything she knew before she passed. I used to dream about having a little shop somewhere, making bread and cakes and pies for people." "You could still do that," Logan said. "In Laytonville, perhaps, or another town." Martha shook her head. "It takes money to start a business, and a divorced woman would struggle to get credit or find people willing to rent her space. That dream died with my marriage." "Dreams do not have to die just because circumstances change," Logan said quietly. "They just need to adapt." His words stayed with her, warming something in her chest that had been cold for a very long time. As the week progressed, Martha found herself watching Logan more and more. She noticed the way his muscles flexed when he chopped wood, the careful way he handled the small animals he trapped, the gentleness in his large hands when he helped her over rough ground during their walks around the clearing. He was unlike any man she had ever known. There was a quiet strength to him, a sense of complete self-sufficiency that was both impressive and oddly comforting. On the 8th day of her stay, Martha woke to find the cabin filled with the scent of fresh bread. She sat up in confusion, seeing Logan at the table, carefully removing a loaf from his small Dutch oven. "How did you?" she began. He looked almost bashful. "You mentioned your mother teaching you to bake. I thought you might enjoy making bread again." "I had the flour and yeast, just needed to get it started for you." Martha climbed out of bed, moved beyond words. She approached the table, examining the loaf. It was a credible effort, if a bit lopsided. "You did this for me. I thought it might remind you of better times," he said. "And that maybe you could teach me to do it properly. I am tired of my own bad cooking." Something shifted in that moment. The careful distance they had been maintaining, the formal way they addressed each other, it began to crumble. Martha smiled at him, truly smiled for the first time since arriving at his cabin, and saw his eyes light up in response. "I would be happy to teach you, Logan," she said, deliberately using his first name. "If you will call me Martha instead of Miss Lawson." "Martha," he said, testing the name. "I can do that." They spent that morning baking together, Logan following Martha's instructions with the same careful attention he brought to everything he did. He was a quick student, and by afternoon they had produced 4 beautiful loaves and were both dusted with flour and laughing at Logan's attempt to knead dough with his large, work-roughened hands. "You have to be gentler," Martha said, demonstrating again. "Think of it like calming a frightened animal, firm but careful." Logan watched her hands move through the dough, his expression focused. When he tried again, his movements were more controlled, more measured. "Like this." "Better," Martha said, moving closer to adjust his grip. As her hand touched his, she felt a spark of electricity run through her. She looked up and found Logan staring at her, his eyes dark with an emotion she could not quite name. "Martha," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I do not want you to go to Laytonville," he said. "I mean, if that is what you want, I will take you there as I promised. But these past days, having you here, it has made me realize how empty my life has been. I like talking to you. I like seeing you in my cabin when I come home. I like the sound of your voice and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I know I have no right to ask this. I know you have been through hell because of your marriage, but I am asking anyway. Would you consider staying here with me?" Martha's breath caught in her throat. She had felt the growing connection between them, had found herself increasingly reluctant to think about leaving, but she had not dared to hope that Logan felt the same way. "Stay as what?" she asked carefully. "A housekeeper, a companion." Logan set down the dough and took her flour-dusted hands in his much larger ones. "Stay as whatever you want to be. If you just want a safe place to live while you figure out your next step, I will give you that and ask nothing in return. But if you might want something more, if you might be willing to give a broken-down ex-soldier a chance, then I would like to court you properly. Take our time, get to know each other better, and see if maybe we could build something real together." Martha felt tears gathering in her eyes, but these were different from the bitter tears she had shed in Willits. These were born of hope and relief, and the overwhelming realization that this good, kind man truly saw her. Not as a divorced woman, not as damaged goods, but as a person worthy of respect and affection. "I would like that," she whispered. "I would like that very much." Logan's face broke into a smile that transformed his rugged features. He pulled her into his arms, enveloping her in a hug that made her feel safe and cherished. She pressed her face against his broad chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart, and felt something inside her begin to heal. The weeks that followed were the happiest Martha could remember. Logan courted her with old-fashioned courtesy, treating her like something precious. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows, shared his favorite reading spots under the ancient redwoods, and taught her to fish in the cold mountain streams. In return, Martha filled his cabin with warmth and laughter, cooking meals that were far superior to his bachelor fare and introducing small touches of comfort like curtains for the window and a tablecloth for the rough wooden table. They talked for hours every day, sharing their pasts, their fears, their dreams. Logan told her about the war, about the friends he had lost, and the nightmares that still sometimes woke him in the darkest hours of the night. Martha shared the pain of Thomas's betrayal, the slow erosion of her self-worth, and the terror of being completely alone in the world with no one to turn to. "You are not alone anymore," Logan told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "As long as I am alive, you will never be alone again." As autumn deepened and the aspens turned gold in the high country, their physical affection grew alongside their emotional intimacy. Logan would take Martha's hand as they walked, or brush a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Martha found herself leaning into his solid warmth, craving his touch in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. One cool October evening, as they sat close together on the log bench Logan had built outside the cabin, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Logan turned to her with a serious expression. "Martha, I know it has only been 2 months since you arrived here. I know that by most standards, that is not nearly long enough to know if two people are truly suited for each other. But I am 32 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I love you, completely and without reservation. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." He pulled a small object from his pocket and held it out to her. In the fading light, Martha could see it was a ring, carved from a piece of dark wood and polished to a soft sheen. "I made this for you. I know it is not much compared to a gold ring, but I wanted it to be something I created with my own hands, something that came from the trees and mountains that brought us together." Martha took the ring with trembling fingers, her eyes filling with tears. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she whispered. "And yes, Logan, yes, I will marry you. I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you scared off that bear, but I was too afraid to admit it to myself. You have given me back my life, my hope, my belief that I deserve happiness. I cannot imagine spending my future with anyone else." Logan slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into a kiss that was sweet and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to take you down to the town, find a preacher, get married properly. I know your last marriage ended in pain, and I want our beginning to be everything that was not." "I do not need a fancy ceremony," Martha said. "I just need you." "I know," Logan said, "but I want the world to know you are my wife. I want it official and legal and proper. You deserve that." They made the journey to Willits 2 weeks later, riding on Logan's horse. Martha was nervous about returning to the town that had rejected her, but Logan's presence gave her courage. He was intimidating in his size and obvious strength, and he made it clear with every gesture and glance that Martha was under his protection. They went directly to Reverend Walsh's home. The Reverend opened the door and his eyes widened when he saw Martha standing on his porch beside the massive mountain man. "Miss Lawson," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I had heard you left town." "I did," Martha said, her voice steady. "I am back only briefly. This is Logan Sawyer. We would like you to marry us if you are willing." Reverend Walsh looked between them, clearly taken aback. "Marry you? But you are divorced. The church does not look kindly on remarriage after divorce." Logan stepped forward, and though he did not move aggressively, his sheer physical presence made the Reverend take a step back. With respect, Reverend, Miss Lawson's husband abandoned her 3 years ago. He was the one who secured the divorce, not her. She has done nothing wrong. We love each other and we want to be married. Will you perform the ceremony or not? The Reverend hesitated, and Martha could see the calculation in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. Very well. I suppose in the eyes of God you are both free to marry. When would you like to do this? Now, Logan said firmly. Today. They were married that afternoon in the small church, with only 2 witnesses pulled in from the street. Martha wore her best dress, and Logan had trimmed his beard and hair for the occasion, though he still looked every inch the mountain man. As they spoke their vows, Martha felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. When the ceremony ended and Logan kissed her as his wife, Martha saw several townspeople who had gathered at the church windows, drawn by gossip of the divorced woman returning to town. Among them was Mrs. Henderson, her face pinched with disapproval. But Martha found she did not care. Let them judge. Let them whisper. She had found something far more valuable than their approval. She had found love, real and true and lasting. They spent their wedding night at the small hotel in Willits, the one luxury Logan insisted on. The room was simple but clean, and Martha felt only a slight nervousness as they closed the door behind them. Logan was patient and gentle, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Their lovemaking was nothing like the perfunctory coupling Martha had endured in her first marriage. This was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the deep emotional connection they had built over the past months. Afterward, as Martha lay in Logan's arms, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers, she felt tears slip down her cheeks. "What is wrong?" Logan asked immediately, his voice full of concern. "Did I hurt you?" "No," Martha said, smiling through her tears. "I am crying because I am happy. For the first time in years I am truly, completely happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way again." Logan held her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I will spend every day of my life trying to keep you feeling this way," he promised. "You are mine now, and I take care of what is mine." They returned to the mountain cabin the next day, and Martha felt as if she were truly coming home. Over the following months, she threw herself into making the cabin more comfortable and efficient. She expanded the garden, planning for a larger crop the next spring. She organized Logan's supplies and made curtains from fabric Logan brought back from a trip to the general store. She even convinced him to build a small addition to the cabin, a separate room that could serve as a bedroom, giving them more space. Logan, for his part, seemed to thrive with her presence. He smiled more, laughed more, and talked about future plans with an enthusiasm Martha had never heard in him before. He spoke of expanding his trapping operation, maybe taking on a partner to help with the longer expeditions. He wanted to build Martha a proper kitchen with a real stove instead of just the fireplace. He even mentioned the possibility of starting a small sawmill operation, taking advantage of the abundant timber around them. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow that piled high around the cabin and turned the world into a pristine white wilderness. Martha had worried about being isolated during the long winter months, but instead, she found the enforced closeness with Logan to be wonderful. They spent their days working side by side, reading aloud to each other, and making love under the patchwork quilts while snow fell softly outside their window. In February, Martha began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be certain before telling Logan, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. When she finally told him one morning over breakfast, watching his face as the realization hit him, his joy was so profound it brought tears to her eyes. A baby. He said, his voice almost reverent. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Martha said, smiling. "Probably late summer if my calculations are right." Logan swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he would make her dizzy. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am going to be a father. I never thought I would have this. A wife, a child, a real family. You have given me everything, Martha." "We have given each other everything," Martha corrected gently. "You saved me, Logan. In every way a person can be saved. I would not have this child, this life, this happiness without you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Logan was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about Martha overexerting herself. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from a place of love and his natural protective instincts. In August, when Martha's time came, Logan rode down to Willits to fetch the midwife, a practical woman named Mrs. Cooper, who did not seem to care about Martha's divorced status, only about bringing babies safely into the world. The labor was long and difficult, and more than once, Martha saw naked fear in Logan's eyes as he held her hand and whispered encouragement. But in the end, their son was born healthy and howling, a robust baby with a shock of dark hair and lungs that seemed impossibly powerful for such a small creature. Logan held him with a mixture of awe and terror, his large hands cradling the tiny body as if it were made of the most delicate glass. "What should we name him?" Martha asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness as she watched her husband bond with their son. "What about James?" Logan suggested. "After my oldest brother, he died in the war, but he was the best man I ever knew. If our son grows up to be half the man James was, we will have done well." "James Sawyer," Martha said, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, James." The next few years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Young James grew into a sturdy, adventurous toddler who loved following his father around the clearing and getting into everything he could reach. Logan proved to be a devoted father, patient with James's endless questions and careful to teach him about the mountains and wilderness that surrounded their home. Martha's skills as a baker, which had lain dormant for so long, found new expression. She began making extra bread and pastries, which Logan would take with him when he delivered game to the logging camps. The loggers loved her baking, and soon she had a steady side business, with Logan transporting orders back and forth. It was not the bakery she had once dreamed of, but it was something, a way to use her skills and contribute to their household income. In the spring of 1878, when James was nearly 2 years old, Logan came home from a supply run to Willits with interesting news. "There is a new family moving into town," he told Martha as they prepared dinner together. "They are opening a restaurant and are looking for someone who can supply them with quality baked goods. The owner asked if I knew anyone who might be interested." Martha felt a flutter of excitement. "Did you tell them about me?" "I did," Logan said. "I showed them the bread I was carrying, told them you could make just about anything they wanted. They want to meet with you, discuss terms and quantities." "What about my reputation?" Martha asked, the old fear creeping back in. "Will they care that I am divorced?" Logan pulled her into his arms, his embrace warm and reassuring. "You are not divorced anymore. You are Martha Sawyer, my wife and the mother of my child. And even if you were divorced, it would not matter. Your baking speaks for itself. Anyone who passes up quality because of foolish prejudice is not worth doing business with anyway." They met with the restaurant owners, a young couple from San Francisco named Peter and Alice Morrison. The Morrisons were refreshingly practical, more interested in Martha's skills than her past. They struck a deal on the spot for Martha to supply them with bread, rolls and pastries 3 times a week. The arrangement proved profitable for everyone involved. The restaurant thrived, developing a reputation for excellent food, and Martha's baking was a significant part of that success. She hired a local woman to help with the increased production, giving employment to someone who needed it. The extra income allowed Logan to reduce his trapping activities and focus more on the sawmill operation he had been slowly building. As their financial situation improved, Logan surprised Martha with plans for a new house. "The cabin has served us well," he said, spreading hand-drawn plans across their kitchen table. "But we are growing. We need more space. I want to build you a proper house, Martha. Something big enough for our family and whatever the future brings." Over the next year, with help from men Logan hired from the logging camps, a beautiful 2-story house rose in the clearing beside the original cabin. It had a real kitchen with a massive stove perfect for Martha's baking, a parlor with large windows that let in abundant light, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. Martha cried when she first walked through the completed house, overwhelmed by how far she had come from that desperate woman fleeing into the wilderness. In the fall of 1879, Martha gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Logan's mother. The birth was easier than James's had been, and Elizabeth proved to be a calm, contented baby who rarely fussed. James, now 3, was fascinated by his little sister and appointed himself her official protector. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the business prospered, and Logan and Martha's love deepened with each passing year. They faced challenges, of course. There were harsh winters, failed crops, and a frightening week when James fell ill with fever. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger through shared trials. In 1882, when Martha went into Willits to deliver baked goods to the restaurant, she ran into Mrs. Henderson on the street. The older woman's face pinched when she saw Martha, but she could not avoid the encounter without being obviously rude. "Mrs. Sawyer," she said stiffly. "Mrs. Henderson," Martha replied with cool politeness. She had long since stopped caring what the gossiping woman thought of her. "I hear your baking business is quite successful," Mrs. Henderson said, and there was something almost grudging in her tone. "The Morrisons rave about your skills." "I am fortunate to have found a market for my work," Martha said simply. Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "I suppose I owe you an apology," she said finally, "for how I behaved when your divorce papers came. It was unkind. You seem to have done well for yourself despite everything." Martha considered the woman for a long moment. She could be gracious or she could be honest. She chose honesty. "You and the other women of this town nearly destroyed me, Mrs. Henderson. You judged me for something that was not my fault and refused to show me any Christian charity when I needed it most. I do not know if I can forgive that completely. But I have a good life now, and I will not let old bitterness poison it. So I accept your apology, and I hope you have learned to be kinder to the next person who needs compassion instead of judgment." She walked away before Mrs. Henderson could respond, her head held high. That evening, when she told Logan about the encounter, he pulled her close and kissed her temple. "I am proud of you," he said. "You have become so strong, so sure of yourself. That is the woman I always knew you could be." As the years continued to pass, Logan and Martha built a life that was rich in every way that mattered. They had a 3rd child in 1884, another son they named Thomas, not after Martha's first husband, but because they both liked the name and wanted to give it new, positive associations. Their children grew up wild and free in the mountains, educated at home by Martha and Logan, who both believed strongly in the value of learning. The sawmill operation grew into a legitimate business, employing several men and providing quality lumber to the growing communities in the region. Martha's baking operation expanded as well, and by 1886, she had opened a small bakery in Willits itself, run by a trusted manager while Martha focused on the production side at their mountain home. The little bakery became known as the best in the county, and people came from miles around for Martha's bread and pastries. The former seamstress shop where Martha had once rented a tiny room was now the location of her thriving business. The irony was not lost on her, though she felt no bitterness about it now. That frightened, desperate woman who had fled into the wilderness seemed like a different person, someone Martha remembered with compassion but no longer identified with. On their 10th wedding anniversary in October of 1886, Logan took Martha back to the spot where they had first met, where he had scared off the bear that had nearly ended her journey before it truly began. They stood by the rushing creek, holding hands and watching the autumn leaves drift down from the trees. "You ever regret it?" Logan asked quietly. "Staying with me instead of going to Laytonville or somewhere else where you might have had an easier life?" Martha turned to look at him, at this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, who had given her love and safety and a family and a future. His hair was touched with gray now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the mountain sun. But to her, he was as handsome as he had been the day they met, perhaps more so because she knew the good heart that beat beneath his rugged exterior. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Logan. You saw me when everyone else looked away. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. I could search the whole world and never find a better man or a better life than what we have built together." Logan pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am the lucky one," he murmured against her hair. "You brought light into my darkness. You made this lonely mountain cabin into a home. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just surviving. I love you, Martha. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the creek rushed by and the mountains stood eternal around them. Martha thought about the journey that had brought her here, about all the pain and fear and desperation she had endured. She thought about the town that had shunned her, about Thomas's betrayal, about the nights she had cried herself to sleep wondering if she would ever be happy again. And then she thought about what came after. About Logan's kindness and strength, about the family they had built, about the business they had created, about the life they shared in these beautiful mountains. Every moment of suffering had been worth it to get here, to this perfect moment of peace and love and belonging. "Let us go home," she said finally, smiling up at Logan. "Our children will be wondering where we are." They walked back through the forest together, following the familiar path to their house. As they emerged into the clearing and saw the house Logan had built with his own hands, saw the smoke rising from the chimney and heard the laughter of their children playing in the yard, Martha felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been lost, but she had been found. She had been rejected, but she had been accepted. She had been deemed unworthy, but she had been loved beyond measure. The town had shunned her for being divorced, but the mountain man had seen only a woman who deserved a second chance. And in giving her that chance, he had given her everything. Their children ran to greet them, James now a sturdy boy of 8, Elizabeth a sweet 5-year-old with Logan's eyes, and little Thomas toddling along behind it too. Logan scooped up Thomas while Martha embraced the older two, and together the family walked into their home. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Martha looked at each beloved face illuminated by lamplight. She looked at Logan, her rock and her refuge, the man who had shown her what real love looked like. She looked at James, so much like his father in his quiet strength and gentle nature. She looked at Elizabeth, bright and curious and endlessly creative. She looked at Thomas, still discovering the world with wide-eyed wonder. This was her life now. This was her family, her home, her happiness. She had walked through fire and come out stronger on the other side. She had been broken and had healed. She had lost everything and had found something far better than what she had lost. "What are you thinking about?" Logan asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Martha smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I am thinking about how grateful I am for all of this, for you, for our children, for the life we have built together. I am thinking about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us exactly where we are meant to be." Logan squeezed her hand, his eyes warm with understanding and love. "I know exactly what you mean." As the years continued to unfold, bringing new challenges and joys, Martha never forgot those dark days in Willits when she thought her life was over. But she also never dwelled on them. The past was the past, a chapter that had closed when she walked into the wilderness and found Logan waiting to catch her when she fell. They grew old together in their mountain home, watching their children grow and eventually start families of their own. James became a logger like his father, though he used his education to eventually open a lumber supply business that served the entire county. Elizabeth married a teacher and opened a school in Willits, providing education to children whose parents could not afford to send them away. Thomas, the youngest, showed an entrepreneurial spirit and eventually took over Martha's bakery, expanding it into a chain of 3 locations. Martha and Logan became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They watched the world change around them, saw California grow from a rough frontier into a modern state. But through all the changes, their love remained constant, a foundation that never wavered. When Logan died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 in 1921, Martha was devastated but not broken. They had had 45 years together, 45 years of love and partnership and shared adventure. She mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the life they had built and the legacy they left behind. Martha lived another 5 years, long enough to see all of her grandchildren grown and several great-grandchildren born. She stayed in the house Logan had built, surrounded by memories and love. When she finally passed away quietly one spring morning in 1926, she was 99 years old, still sharp-minded and clear-eyed until the very end. Her children and grandchildren gathered for her funeral, sharing stories of her strength and kindness, her business acumen and her generosity. They talked about how she had overcome a devastating divorce to build a successful business and raise a loving family. They spoke of her charity work, how she had always been the first to help anyone in need, regardless of their past or circumstances. But the story that was told most often, the one that became family legend passed down through generations, was about how Martha had fled into the wilderness alone and desperate, and how Logan had found her and seen her worth when no one else would. It became a story about second chances and redemption, about love that transforms and heals. The town of Willits eventually grew large enough that few remembered the scandal of Martha's divorce or the cruel way the townspeople had treated her. But the Sawyer family remembered. They remembered, and they made sure that every generation learned the lesson of Martha and Logan's love story, that people deserve compassion, that the past does not define the future, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things we will ever know. The house Logan built stood for many more decades, eventually turned into a family museum by Martha and Logan's descendants. Visitors could walk through the rooms where love had flourished, where a family had grown, where 2 broken people had found each other and become whole. And if you stood very still in that house, in the quiet of a mountain evening with the sun setting behind the eternal peaks, you could almost feel it still, the love that had filled those rooms. The love that had proven stronger than judgment, more enduring than hardship, and more powerful than any force that tried to tear it apart. Martha and Logan's story became a testament to the truth that love, real love, sees beyond the surface to the person beneath. It sees worth where others see only failure. It offers hope where others offer only condemnation. And it builds futures where others see only ruins. In the end, the town that had shunned her became the town that celebrated her legacy. The mountain man who had saved her became her eternal love. And the woman who thought her life was over discovered that it was only just beginning, that the best chapters were still ahead, waiting to be written in the shadow of the mountains where true love had found her when she needed it most.